Hey guys, so with Bursts of Destiny being released at the beginning of November, we finally have a set again that contains some competitive new archetypes, so excited for this month's meta-analysis of the top ranked players on Dueling book. Fun fact, I started doing these monthly analysis November of 2020, so we have now come full circle. So for this month's meta-analysis, it was a little different than usual because I did up to top 50 ranked players instead of the usual top 25, only because I wanted to include replays from November 5th and beyond only, so that we are just looking at the post Burst of Destiny format. This meant I needed more players so that I can hit that rough 500 match value I usually get, so this time we had 536 matches to work with. That being said, we still do see Tri-Brigade as the most played deck, however this time it was mostly Tri-Brigade Lyrilusc, considering some of the new bird cards lately. Then Drytron is still up there. I feel like it's almost forgotten at the moment, even though it is still a tier 1 deck. Now Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll had actually disappeared for the most part in the last few months of my meta-analysis, but it looks like we are seeing them back this time around. Not that they got any new cards post-BODE, but I think at least some of them were incorporating Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. And then we have our first new archetype in BODE making it on here, which is Swordsoul, and I will talk about this deck a little bit later. I think it's something we will have to get used to now, going forward. Prank Kids is still up there, although I think the hit to Meow Meow Mew was actually rather more impactful than people thought it would. Then we have Sky Striker, which sort of became quiet the last month or so, but perhaps it's coming back now because DPE works really well with this deck, since you can pop itself away to free your main monster zones for you to be able to play your Sky Striker spells, and DPE will come back on the next standby phase. Virtual World has taken a bit of a backseat compared to last month, where after the ban list people really thought that Virtual World would do really well. I think that with so many decks playing DPE now that can pop, that might cause Virtual World to struggle a little bit if they're going second. Next we have yet another new archetype from BODE, Floowandereeze, which on announcement I think people were really hyped, but then after some time people believed that it was not as good as some let on, as it can have some major brick issues. And then we have Pure Zodiac, but another deck here is Evil Twin. So with BODE, they did get the new Link 4 in Trouble Sunny. That really does improve this deck a lot by allowing the deck to special out their 2 Link 2s, and Trouble Sunny can also send an opponent's card while it's engraved, and honestly has some really good effects. Next we have Phantom Knight, and I was really surprised to see this deck so low for this month. Considering that with DPE and the Scythe lock that they're utilizing, I honestly think that this deck is in tier 1 contention. Maybe people were busy trying out some new archetypes, but I suspect that at least by the next month we'll see more representation from this deck. And then we have Dragon Link and Mathmech, some familiar favorites in my meta-analysis. We do have several decks included in the other section, and this included decks like Infernoble, Mermail, ABC, Eldritch, and even one match including Dark Lords. Now compare this to last month's breakdown and you see the same decks but just in different proportions. Essentially Drytron and Tri-Brigade are going to consistently take up the top spots, but last month we did have some fun rogue options to make it on here like Plunder Patrol and Grimaju. Now our top 50 players won about 2/3 of their matches, and keep in mind this is lower than the usual 75%-ish value you see because we are looking at top 50 players this time around rather than the top 25, who of course would have higher win percentages. As for playstyle, this time it was a little funky because Swordsoul technically is not a combo deck and more mid-range, but I still categorize it as combo for the purposes of this video since it's closer to that than Control, at least I think. Open to your thoughts as well, but I did want to keep it consistent to just the 3 deck playstyles to keep it simple. Anyways, we basically had an even distribution of combo and control decks being played by our top players this month. Compare that to last month where there was more favoritism towards combo decks at 55%, and you see that the top players won 77% of their matches because again, we restricted to top 25 players for last month, which is what I normally do. Now let's cover a few decks in detail as usual. And as I said before, for this month, most of the Tri-Brigade matches seem to involve the Lyrilusc variant. The top players won 69% of their matches with the deck, and they did have a better performance if they won the die roll, winning 76% of their matches in that case versus 61% if they lost the die roll. Overall, among all players on Dueling book, this deck is still the most played deck and won about 58% of the matches in the last 7 days. So interestingly enough, Drytron, played by our top players, seem to have struggled compared to usual, winning 58% of their matches. The weirder thing is that this month, the top players running Drytron actually did slightly worse when they won the die roll versus losing the die roll. Now this is bound to happen when you are dealing with small sample sizes like in my videos. Of course, we know that Drytron will do better if they go first, but sometimes when I collect the data, that period may have just been where our top players slumped a bit and didn't have a good record, but still had a high enough rating to be in the top 50. Overall, it's still a really popular deck being played third most by all players, with a 59% win percentage in the last 7 days. So I've never seen this before in my meta-analysis where the win percentages by all players on DB was actually higher than that of the top ranked players. So again, perhaps our top players running Drytron had a slump at the time I collected the data, but was good enough to still remain in the top rankings. Next up we have Dogmatika Invoked Shaddoll, where at one point it was the clear tier 1 deck and just somehow very quietly fell off the tier 1 status, although still a really strong deck where our top players won 62% of their matches. Now historically in my meta-analysis, the deck's win percentage did not really differ based on die roll, and we see that here again where they won 61 to 63% regardless of the die roll. Overall, decently popular as well at 13th most played in the last 7 days, and they won 55% of the matches. Shaddoll is certainly a fan favorite deck, and Winda is still just an absolute beast, so I don't think it's surprising this deck is doing well. Next up we have our first new deck to make the meta analysis, which is Swordsoul. The top players won about 61% of the matches with this deck, and the things they set up look simple but is pretty effective. They can have their Synchro for the monster negate, Baron for the Omni negate, and also have their archetype Icarus attack. Is it tier 1? I'm not too sure. It certainly doesn't seem to have any overwhelming presence. Now by die roll, we see again some funky numbers where the deck had a much higher win percentage when the top players lost the die roll. This is another deck for the most part is aiming to go first, so should theoretically do better when they win the die roll, but again, when you are dealing with small sample sizes, you are bound to see something like this time to time. Now because Swordsoul is a new deck, it doesn't seem like it's being properly categorized by YGOscope for me to be able to see how often it's being played by all players on Dueling Book. YGOscope sometimes categorizes this deck as Yang Zing, but mostly as other or undefined, so let's hope that they can get that sorted soon. Now while Prank Kids was the 5th most played deck, I've covered that deck so many times, so I figured you guys would probably be more interested in the numbers for a new deck such as Floowandereeze. Now among our top players for this month, the deck had a ridiculous 85% win percentage, but we are only dealing with 26 matches, so this value is most likely bound to be lower if we had a larger sample size. Surprisingly enough, the top players had roughly equal win percentage whether they won or lost the die roll. This was a shock since they are a normal summon reliant deck, and also a deck that does need to go first. Now I'm not sure how much of a presence this deck will have in the meta. Of course, Barrier Statue Lock is really strong, as is Ryza, but it does need the field spell and a name to be able to really do anything and need a lot of draw power to fix its brick issues. Curious to see whether it will be able to reach tier 1 status. Now similar to Swordsoul, this deck is currently not really being categorized by YGOscope, so I don't know how often it's being played by all players on Dueling Book, but again, hopefully this can get sorted soon. Alright guys, so that was it for this month's meta-analysis post Burst of Destiny. Hope you found that to be useful. For my next video, I'm going to try to do an analysis of Simo's progression series as based on Farfad's request, so excited to start working on that. Take care guys.